Russia's going to have to do more dangerous and crazier things in order to survive. And these are all indications that Ukraine is very close to victory.
Hello and welcome to TVP World. Rule number 1. Whatever happens, do not trust anything that comes from Russia. When you look at the almost 2 years of this full-scale invasion, and you know what is the way that the Prigozhins, war criminals, operate in the territories they enter, and you see the footage released with them conquering a city, with the guys with mobile telephones taking selfies 5 meters away, what do you make of it?
Well, first, so that the Russians do not totally control the narrative, as all this is happening, we have to remember, I've been hearing a lot from people who are volunteering in Kherson. The effects of the floods caused by the Russian destruction of that dam is still terrible. The water supply is ruined in many places. As the waters have gone down, there's so many dead bodies. And when I speak with people every day who are helping out there, they come under constant shelling. So we need to remember that stuff like that is still continuing. Kyiv was hit Friday night. But as we look at what happened over the weekend, I'd say the prevailing attitude in Ukraine was, a friend put it very well, a friend in the military. He said, it's a circus. And we could take a guilty pleasure in laughing at it, sharing some funny memes, but everyone here is staying focused on what needs to be done for victory, especially the counteroffensive, because all of this could be a distraction. And as you were saying earlier, we never know what's true coming out of Russia. But there's a few things that we can tell for sure. Even if this was some kind of tactic by the Kremlin for something, it is a sign of weakness. Because on February 24th, 2022, Moscow thought they could take Kyiv in 3 days. Now, as Ukrainians are getting ever closer to victory, as we've been saying for weeks, and we've been expecting, Russia's going to have to do more dangerous and crazier things in order to survive. And these are all indications that Ukraine is very close to victory. And to see this type of chaos in Russia, even if it was planned and organized, it still makes Russia look like a circus. And it's, I've had several friends who've been working on the breakup of the Russian Federation. This seemed impossible. My friend Taras Bik has been on your program to talk about, how the best solution.
Yeah, we talked about it last week with Taras Bik. It was a very interesting discussion about actually Russia being in a so weak state that in a way it can be dismantled by the nations that are within the Russia itself. This is still a possibility. That's for sure.
Yeah, and whenever I mention that to respectable people in the Pentagon and friends in Brussels and all around the world, they laughed at me. But after Saturday, they're not laughing. They all are seeing this as a real possibility. We always get the experts are always the same experts who said Ukraine was going to fall also said that the breakup of Russia was impossible. And there is now a glimmer of hope. I think for many people see that there's a possibility. But again, when I was looking at some of the stories about the Titan sub sinking when they were going to look at the Titanic, one of the tributes to the explorers was that they were pushing dragons off maps. In the olden times, the areas that human beings had not explored, they had dragons there. And when I saw that phrase, I'm thinking, this is exactly what Ukrainians are doing. They're pushing dragons off maps. Everyone thought it was impossible to resist Moscow, impossible for Moscow to even fall. And one day by day, week by week, those dragons are being pushed away. And so that's, at the very least, that's what we can say about what happened on Saturday. And, it's Prigozhin was sort of Putin's Rasputin, very trusted. But as we know in those circles, there's not real trust. And so there's any number of permutations, which we can analyze a bit. But the main thing is and that's what everyone here in Ukraine is doing. It's get a good laugh out of it, because actually people need a laugh for energy. I mean, that's a real necessity here. But then to proceed of the work of victory. And I think for all Western partners, this, as you look at some of the headlines about this, there's always a scaremongering. I went to Drudge Report, and they linked to a Daily Mail story saying, oh, this could make, everything's even more dangerous for the world, chaos in Russia. And there could be somebody worse than Vladimir Putin. But that really ignores reality. No one could be worse than what Putin has done. No one could, you can't destroy Bakhmut more than you destroyed Bakhmut. You can't destroy Mariupol more than you destroyed Mariupol. And the only reason Kyiv and Odessa and Kharkiv are not like that is because the Ukrainians have pushed back. So if this should show us anything, it's now is the moment to get every supply you can to the hands of the Ukrainians and push hard and break Moscow. This is the time to do it.
Yeah, Joe, this is very interesting because when I was thinking and watching the whole story developing on Saturday, I had a day off, so I didn't have to be, on air. I didn't have to watch every single cable that appeared on my TV screen. But this is a kind of an image that we were convinced to have in a way. We had it in 1990s. All the video game scenarios, if you are playing an Xbox or PlayStation, you probably played 1 or 2 games with a scenario of a wild Russian general who organized some military coup in Kremlin, and he was trying to get to the nukes so that he can do it against the legitimate Russian power. We all laughed. But think about Prigozhin as a figure created in some kind of PR campaign as exactly this kind of person, with all the sledgehammers, sending videos, killing people, and recording it, putting it online so that the people know that this is the real bad guy. And if this is a real bad guy, you got Vladimir Putin. He's not that bad. He's horse riding. He's fishing. What do you make of it?
Michal, yeah, well, as I saw some of the Western reactions, perhaps that was, that was one of the considerations of the Kremlin, one of the motivations to make Putin the reasonable guy, or afraid of something worse, and somehow Putin's reasonable. And that's why we really have to, in this moment, remember everything that, this war, Putin has enabled it. He's the one that laid out the philosophical justification for it. And, it's interesting, if there was a revolution in Russia, it's very different from the revolution that happened in Ukraine in 2014. In 2014, it was a movement of the people, so much so that the people, they kicked out the institutions of government, which were pro-Putin, corrupt. They even had corrupt ties with United States government and officials and many others. The people kicked them out of their country, and for several weeks, there weren't even police in Ukraine, but there was not widespread crime and looting because the people organized in solidarity. They knew this was their moment. They organized a revolution together. Now, what we saw, that circus in Russia, was chieftains. If anything, it was chieftains battling it out. Now, maybe it was all a stage. We don't know. Maybe Putin was trying, Prigozhin, Putin's Rasputin was very loyal, and he was trying to help Putin find out who would be a traitor. We don't know, and we can't really go into too much of that because I think it'll take away our energy from what we need to do. But if you just look at the difference of what a revolution is in Ukraine, which I want to keep reiterating because people don't realize that, how the Maidan revolution was truly of the people. And the writer Peter Hitchens, brother of Christopher Hitchens, was writing in the UK over the weekend, oh, this is horrible if there's going to be a civil war in Russia, the long oppressed Russian people. But these are the same people that have been murdering and slaughtering Ukrainians.
Those people are supporting this war by 70 or more %. You've seen the way that Prigozhin was treated in the cities when he was driving his car like a rock star. I mean, this is the guy who was killing the same people in Ukraine that the regular Russian troops were. So in that matter, there's no real difference between Prigozhin or Shoigu or Patrushev or some other members of this gang. Yeah,
it's all the same. And instead of giving all the attention, say, to Prigozhin, for example, on Friday, there was a Ukrainian boy, 16 years old. He is from the village of Berdyansk in Zaporizhia, a little seaside town, seaside city. And the Russians have occupied that since early on in the war, the full-scale war. They imprisoned him and his friends last September because they were proud Ukrainians. And in fact, when he was a prisoner, he was spouting off Ukrainian history almost nonstop to annoy and antagonize his Russian captors. They finally let him go. Perhaps they didn't want to hear that anymore. And so he was free for several months. And on Friday, he released a video in Ukrainian saying, well, here it is. Death is coming. It's death, fellas. Goodbye, and Slava Ukraini. He and some friends, we don't know their names yet, had found some weapons. They left their house and they began to shoot the Russians that were occupying their city. Tigran was killed. A 16-year-old who had the gumption and the courage under occupation to find weapons and become a partisan and attack the Russian occupiers. That's heroism, not the people cheering Prigozhin or whatever in the streets of some Russian city.
Didn't know this story. I mean, it's a story of killing Russians with the diamonds that those kind of people are for real, the diamonds of the Ukrainian nation. The whole thing that we are talking right now here, coming back to this whole, basically it's a good name, Prigozhin's circus. There is also another aspect of this whole story. If Russia wasn't in trouble, there would be no need to organize such a circus. This is also another important factor. We don't know exactly what it is needed for, but if Russia was in a superpower position, but if Russian status was still the status of superpower, they wouldn't do that.
Absolutely, and this is what, I think we all have to remind ourselves, again, the closer Ukraine has to a realistic prospect of victory, the more Russia's going to have to do things to upset the world, to make people scared, and confused, and because these are the only cards they have left. Now we still have to keep an eye on, of course, the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant. What might they do there? All of these things could be distractions, and that's why it's very important to stay focused on what matters. As a Ukrainian friend, a soldier said earlier today, if there was no one in the trenches, then Ukraine won't be able to keep moving forward. And that's why he says we got to keep these guys alive. That's why, for example, we're trying to raise money for this thermal vision for Yarko. It's those micro things, when you add them up, they give Ukraine the strength to keep pushing against whatever this circus is from the Kremlin. And but there was one interesting thing that Prigozhin on Friday, he did criticize Putin's justification for the war, for the full-scale invasion. And that's, I think, the first time a major Russian figure has actually directly criticized that, saying, Prigozhin actually said and this is very important because people like Robert Kennedy spew this nonsense, that Prigozhin said for 8 years, from the Maidan Revolution in 2014 until 2022, Ukraine was not attacking civilians in Donetsk, in the Donbass. They were only going after the pro-Russian militants that Russia had sent there to try to take Ukrainian territory. And so I was pretty surprised that Prigozhin said that. Again, all of this could be a circus or a distraction, but it is notable that he dissented from that key Russian tenet. That also recalled many Ukrainians were frustrated the past few days while getting some joy from this circus by comments from former President Barack Obama. He said that they did everything they could in 2014 to stop Putin. We challenged Putin with the tools we had at the time. Most Ukrainians think that's not true, that there wasn't real help when Putin took Crimea and sent his people to Donbass in 2014. And in fact, 2 months after he took Crimea, Obama's partner, Joe Biden's son, started taking money from Moscow. And so for so long, the elites have kind of, while pretending to criticize each other, have been in bed together. And remember, there was even a World Cup in Russia during that time. And so what we see, again, this idea, Ukrainian idea, pushing the dragons off the map. Ukrainians are saying we do not need to live in a world where there is a powerful force in Moscow or anywhere else that oppresses people and that tries to not only terrorize the world but to destroy an entire nation. If you remember, last December, former Secretary of State Henry Kissinger said, the world needs Moscow in the global equilibrium. And I would hope that maybe Saturday's events, as whatever they're trying to do there, shows the world that we do not need that type of instability and circus-like craziness. You can't have that in equilibrium because it's inherently unstable and unsteady. And that's, maybe Moscow, they might think that this is going to help them somehow, but this is the moment when hopefully the West will say, let's find the courage and the strength, especially, I think it's the question here in Ukraine, can Ukrainians attack anything in Crimea, the Russian naval base, and anything on Russian soil?
Do you think that Ukraine is in possession of the means of organizing this kind of attack? And another military question, as this whole circus is being played out, and we actually can read it in the official analysis of the war situation that are posted daily, that we didn't see any troops movement on the Russian side. No one left the trenches on the Russian side. So it could also look like a kind of distraction or attempt to deceive Ukraine to use this Prigozhin's right to move troops into the direction of the Russian fortification, which, based on the lack of this movement from the Russian side, could be fatal for Ukraine.
Well, indeed, Michal. So pro-Russian American voices, we know their names. We've seen, including the presidential candidate, have been saying, "Oh, this is a ploy to get Wagner troops into Belarus to attack Kyiv." And that's kind of the party line that they're saying. And we all have to be careful and never complacent. Maybe there is some kind of ruse like that, but we also have to remember, Wagner is quite degraded now because they spent. It took them a year to take Bakhmut, a small city, population 70,000, on the edges of Ukrainian-controlled Ukraine, and it took them a year to do that. It was a bloodbath for Ukrainians, but especially for Wagner. Wagner had so many ex-prisoners and such that they could throw into it. They have to be in a weakened position, and if the Russian army, when it was fresh, could not take Kyiv, this idea that Wagner is somehow secretly in Belarus, again, never be complacent, but and that's where I think we don't want to go too much. The more we get into the weeds on this, I think it's the Kremlin controlling the narratives of our conversation and distracting from the very real reality that Ukraine has stood up to Russia for 16 months, and with just a little bit more, maybe there can be the final push.
The bottom line is that no matter what was the meaning of this whole circus, the Russian troops didn't manage to conquer Ukraine for such a long time. It's not like a 3 days offensive against Kyiv with a parade on the third day. Joe Lindsley with us, as usually on Monday. You can find Joe on Twitter, you can find him all over the social media, and check what you can do to support Yarko, that's the name of the guy? To support
Yarko, Ukrainian medic, and UkrainianFreedomNews.com. We welcome all support. And Mia, I will say on a lighter note, just the idea that there was some army approaching Moscow, that gave everyone here just a little glimpse of maybe one day soon there can be the right army going in that direction to put a stop to all of this.
You see the big smile on my face. Joe Lindsley. See you soon, mate. We see each other on Monday. Dziękuję. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, this show comes back tomorrow.
On behalf and blood of a soldier, a deep inspire and Ukrainian Freedom News. We would like to thank the TVP World Rock Rachon audience and a special donor Peter Jurgensen. Thank you very much.